The great hall of the Galactic Council had never been this quiet. For 3,000 years, voices from across the galaxy had filled this chamber with debates, arguments, and discussions. Today, there was only silence. Ambassador Kethver stood at the center of the room, his blue skin pale with worry. His hands shook as he held the datapad that contained the reports. Around him, representatives from dozens of worlds waited for him to speak. They all knew something terrible had happened. Honored members, Kethver began, his voice cracking. I must report that we have lost contact with all colonies in the Outer Rim. 17 star systems have gone completely silent. The chamber erupted. Voices shouted questions in 100 different languages. High Chancellor Vorthik, a massive creature with 4 arms and eyes like black diamonds, slammed his staff against the floor. The sound echoed through the hall, bringing silence once again. Explain, Vorthik commanded. Kethver touched his datapad, and a hologram appeared in the center of the room. It showed the galaxy, with red dots marking the silent systems. 3 weeks ago, the mining colonies stopped sending their daily reports. Then the research stations went quiet. Now, entire worlds are not responding to any communication. Far from the council chambers, Captain Jake Morrison stood on the bridge of his ship, the New Frontier. He was looking at something that made his stomach turn. Where the colony of Kepler 442b should have been, there was only ash and strange crystal formations. Captain, called Dr. Lisa Carter from her station, you need to see this. Jake walked over to where Lisa was studying her readings. She was the smartest person he knew, but right now she looked confused and scared. The entire colony is gone, she said quietly. But it's not just destroyed. It's like something ate it. The buildings, the people, even the plants, everything organic is just ... gone. But these crystal things are everywhere. Jake looked at the screen showing the dead world below. The crystals were beautiful in a horrible way, growing in perfect geometric patterns across what used to be cities. Any idea what did this? Lisa shook her head. I've never seen anything like it. But Captain, there's something else. These crystals, they're not just random. They're storing something. Data, maybe memories. It's like whatever did this didn't just destroy the colony. It took it. Back on Nexus Prime, the emergency session continued. Reports kept coming in from across the galaxy. The pattern was always the same. Sudden silence, then nothing. Search teams that went to investigate never came back. Then came the transmission that changed everything. The main screen flickered, and a face appeared. It wasn't any species the Council recognized. The being looked almost mechanical, with silver skin and eyes that glowed like stars. When it spoke, its voice echoed strangely, as if many voices were speaking at once. People of this galaxy, the being said. I am a voice of the Devourers. We have returned after 10,000 years of sleep. Your civilizations will be harvested. Your knowledge will become ours. Your resistance is pointless. The transmission showed images of worlds being consumed by massive machines. Cities disappeared into the ground. Forests turned to ash in seconds. People ran screaming as silver ships descended from the sky. We do not negotiate. We do not bargain. We take what we require. Those who resist will suffer. Those who surrender will be processed quickly. You have 7 of your days to decide. The transmission ended, leaving the Council in shocked silence. High Chancellor Vorthik was the first to speak. All representatives will return to their homeworlds immediately. All species must gather their people and retreat to core systems. We will establish defensive perimeters around our most important worlds. On Earth, Admiral Ryan Piers was in a meeting with President Katie Walsh and her top military advisors. The news from the Galactic Council had just reached them. How bad is it? President Walsh asked. Admiral Pierce looked grim. Bad. These devourers have technology we can't match. The Council is ordering all junior species to evacuate frontier colonies and fall back to core worlds. And our colonies? The President asked. That's the problem, Admiral Pierce said. I've been in contact with our colony leaders. None of them want to leave. New Montana, New Texas, New California. They're all saying they'll fight rather than run. Dr. Nathan Cross, Earth's top quantum physicist, spoke up from his chair at the end of the table. Maybe they should fight. Everyone turned to look at him. Dr. Cross was known for his brilliant mind, but he rarely spoke up in military meetings. I've been studying the data from the destroyed colonies, he continued. These devourers, their technology is based on principles we've been working with for decades. They use quantum prediction models to determine how their targets will behave. But what if their models are wrong? President Walsh leaned forward. What do you mean? They've been studying galactic civilizations for thousands of years. They know how most species react when faced with extinction. They run, they hide, they try to negotiate. But humans? Dr. Cross smiled slightly. We've never been very good at doing what's logical. Admiral Pierce frowned. Are you suggesting we fight an enemy that just destroyed 17 star systems? I'm suggesting, Dr. Cross said, that maybe being human is exactly what we need right now. These machines expect logical behavior. They expect species to act in predictable ways. But when has humanity ever done what was expected? President Walsh stood up and walked to the window. Outside, she could see the lights of the capital city. Millions of people going about their lives, not knowing that machines from beyond the stars wanted to harvest them like crops. Get me a line to all our colony leaders, she said finally, and get me the fleet commanders. If our people want to fight, then we're going to give them everything they need. As the meeting broke up, Dr. Cross stayed behind. He had more data to review, more theories to test. Something about the devourer technology bothered him. It was too perfect, too predictable. In his experience, anything that seemed perfect usually had a fatal flaw. He just had to find it before it was too late. Across the galaxy, the countdown had begun. 7 days until the devourers expected an answer. 7 days for billions of people to decide whether to run or fight. Most of the galaxy was already packing to leave, but in human space, something different was happening. On colony after colony, people were checking their weapons, reinforcing their defenses, and sending the same message back to Earth. We are not going anywhere. 3 weeks had passed since the Devourer ultimatum. The galaxy watched in horror as more worlds fell silent. But something strange was happening in human space. Colonel Amy Rodriguez stood on the walls of Fort Liberty, looking up at the sky above. New Montana. The Devourer ships had been circling the planet for 2 days now, but they hadn't attacked yet. Her militia was ready. Farmers, miners, shop owners, all armed with whatever weapons they could find. Colonel, called Sergeant Pete Johnson from the communications post. The alien ships are moving. Amy grabbed her binoculars. Sure enough, the silver ships were descending toward the main settlement. She keyed her radio. All units, this is it. Remember what we practiced. Don't bunch up, keep moving, and make every shot count. The first Devourer machines touched down like metallic insects. They were beautiful and terrible, with limbs that moved too smoothly, and eyes that glowed with cold light. The machines began scanning the area, their sensors sweeping back and forth in predictable patterns. That was their first mistake. Amy's people had studied those patterns. They knew where the machines would look first, and they weren't there. Instead, they waited in positions the machines never bothered to scan. Inside trash dumps, underwater tanks, buried in grain silos. When the attack began, it came from everywhere. At once, The Devourers had faced thousands of species over the millennia. They had detailed files on how each type of civilization would respond to invasion. Most tried to negotiate. Some tried to hide. A few fought back with organized military resistance. None had ever fought back with fertilizer bombs and hunting. Rifles. The machine's predictive systems went haywire, trying to understand why these humans were behaving so irrationally. According to their data, the colony should have surrendered when faced with superior technology. Instead, a farmer named Bob Turner was using his tractor to ram a devourer harvester, while his wife Mary shot at its sensors with a deer rifle. On the other side of human space, Dr. Nathan Cross was having a breakthrough, working around the clock. In his lab on Luna Station, he had finally figured out what was bothering him about devourer technology. "Admiral Pierce," he said over the comm, barely able to contain his excitement. "You need to see this." Admiral Pierce appeared on his screen, looking tired. The past 3 weeks had aged him years. "What do you have, Doc?" "The Devourers aren't as smart as we thought," Nathan said, pulling up his data. "Their entire system is based on prediction. They study a species, figure out how it will behave, and then optimize their attacks accordingly. But here's the thing. They haven't updated their human files in over 50 years. "What difference does that make?" Nathan grinned. 50 years ago, humans were still mostly earthbound. We were predictable, organized, military-focused. But the humans in our colonies today? They're pioneers, rebels, people who left everything behind to build new lives. They don't follow the old patterns." As if to prove his point, reports were flooding in from New Montana. Colonel Rodriguez's impossible defense was working. The Devourers had expected organized resistance from a central command structure. Instead, they faced chaos, individuals and small groups acting independently, using tactics that made no logical sense. Meanwhile, Commander Ben Tucker was leading a rescue mission to Arcadia Station, one of the first human colonies to be attacked. His ship, the Defiance, was built for stealth, not combat. But the mission wasn't about fighting. It was about learning. "Approaching Arcadia now," reported Lieutenant Corinne White from the pilot's seat. "The Devourer ships are still there." Ben studied the scanner readings. "How many survivors?" "Maybe 100 people holed up in the old mining tunnels," Corinne replied. "But the Devourers aren't trying to get them out. It's like they're studying them." That was exactly what they were doing. When Ben's team reached the tunnels, they found something that chilled them to the bone. The Devourers weren't just harvesting. They were learning. Each attack taught them more about human behavior, making them better at predicting what humans would do next. But they were learning from the wrong humans. Back at New Montana, the tide was turning. The Devourers had sent reinforcements, expecting to overwhelm the human defenders with superior numbers. Instead, they found themselves facing an enemy that refused to follow any logical pattern of behavior. When the machines surrounded the school, they expected the humans to surrender to protect their children. Instead, the teachers armed themselves and fought back while the children escaped through tunnels the machines didn't know existed. When the Devourers cut off the power grid, they expected the colony to fall into chaos. Instead, the humans had backup generators hidden in places no logical species would think to put them. Inside the church bell tower, under the dog pound in the middle of the cemetery, Colonel Amy Rodriguez was coordinating the defense from a position that perfectly summed up human logic. She had set up her command post inside the local bar, reasoning that it was the one place in town built to withstand anything. "Status report," she called out to her team. "North Wall is holding," reported Sergeant Johnson. "The Devourers keep trying to breach in the same spot, but Mike's got it covered with his potato cannon." Amy didn't even blink at the idea of defending a colony with root vegetables. At this point, nothing surprised her anymore. On the other side of the galaxy, Captain Sarah Bennett was about to make military history. Her small fleet had encountered a Devourer battle group at Volv 359. According to every tactical manual ever written, she should retreat. Her ships were outnumbered 5-1. Instead, she did something that would be studied in military academies for generations to come. She attacked, but not in any way the Devourers expected. Instead of forming battle lines and exchanging fire, like civilized species, Bennett's ships scattered in all directions. Some flew straight at the enemy ships. Others seemed to run away, only to circle back and attack from behind. One ship actually pretended to be damaged and drifted helplessly until a Devourer ship came close enough to be rammed. The Devourer battle computers couldn't process what they were seeing. Every prediction they made was wrong. Every tactical response they attempted was countered by something that made no sense. In the end, Captain Bennett's fleet didn't just survive, they won. The Devourer ships, overwhelmed by chaotic tactics they couldn't predict, withdrew to regroup and reassess. That victory changed everything. President Katie Walsh stood before the cameras in the White House, knowing that her words would be broadcast to every world in the galaxy. Many of those worlds were already evacuated, their populations hiding in bunkers or fleeing to the galactic core. "My fellow beings," she began, "we've heard your call for retreat. We've seen your preparations for surrender. We understand your fear, because we feel it too. But humanity has something to say to these Devourers." She paused, looking directly into the camera. "We don't know how to quit. We've never been good at doing what's logical when logic means giving up. So we're not retreating. We're not hiding. We're fighting." The president's next words would be remembered as long as humans existed in the galaxy. To anyone out there who's tired of running, tired of being afraid, tired of letting bullies decide your fate, we're setting up at Tau Ceti. Come if you want to fight. Come if you're ready to stand. Come if you believe that freedom is worth more than safety. Across the galaxy, beings who had been packing to flee stopped and listened. For the first time since the crisis began, someone was offering hope instead of retreat. On New Montana, Colonel Rodriguez got the news that Devourer ships were pulling back. The machines had spent 3 days trying to conquer a farming colony and had failed. Their prediction systems were so confused by human behavior that they needed time to recalculate. Amy smiled as she watched the silver ships disappear into hyperspace. "Sergeant Johnson," she called out, "send a message to Earth. Tell them New Montana is still here and we're not going anywhere." Similar messages were coming in from human colonies across the frontier. Against all odds, against all logic, they were holding their ground. Dr. Cross's theory was proving correct. The Devourers had based their strategy on fighting predictable enemies, but humans weren't predictable. They were chaotic, illogical, and stubborn. And for the first time in 10,000 years, the Devourers were learning what it meant to be surprised. The Tau Ceti system had never seen so many different types of ships in one place. They came from across the galaxy, Korthek war vessels shaped like twisted metal spears, Elavini science ships that looked like floating crystals, even a few Ilthari. Ghost ships that seemed to phase in and out of reality. But most surprising of all, they came without permission from their governments. General Tony Martinez stood in the command center of Tau Ceti Station, watching the arrivals with amazement. Each ship that dropped out of hyperspace represented someone who had decided that running wasn't enough anymore. "General," called Lieutenant Commander Rick Stone from his monitoring station, "we've got another group coming in. Looks like ... Silithian refugees?" Tony looked at the screen. The ships were clearly civilian vessels, packed with families who had evacuated from the outer rim. But instead of heading to safety in the core worlds, they had come here to join the fight. The first alien to set foot on the station was Zarthok, a Korthik warrior poet whose people were known for their fierce independence. He was 8 feet tall, covered in natural armor, and carried weapons that looked like they could cut through starship hulls. "Human General Martinez," Zarthok said in heavily accented English, "I have come to learn your ways of war." Tony had dealt with aliens before, but never like this. "Welcome to Tau Ceti Station. Can I ask why you left your homeworld to join us?" Zarthok's 4 eyes glowed with something that might have been anger. "The Devourers took my clan's world. 3 months ago, my government ordered retreat. But the songs of my people speak of warriors who fight impossible battles. I would learn these human songs of war." Behind Zarthok came Dr. Milandra, an Elevini scientist whose graceful form seemed to glow with its own light. Her people were known for their advanced technology and peaceful nature. Seeing one here was like finding a philosopher in a boxing ring. "Dr. Milandra," Tony said, recognizing her from the diplomatic files. "Isn't your homeworld safely in the core systems?" "It is," she replied, her voice like wind chimes. "But my research station at Kepler 438c was among the first to fall. I lost 17 years of research and 300 colleagues. I cannot bring them back, but perhaps I can help ensure it doesn't happen to others." Over the following days, more aliens arrived. Some came alone, some in small groups. All had lost something to the Devourers: homes, families, entire civilizations. And all had heard President Walsh's message and decided to answer the call. The challenge was enormous. Humans had been fighting wars for thousands of years. They understood concepts like acceptable losses and tactical retreats. But many of their new allies came from peaceful species that had never experienced real warfare. Commander Lisa Park had been given the impossible job of training them. She stood in front of a mixed group: humans, Korthake warriors, Elevini scientists, Ilthari mystics, and a dozen other species. "The most important thing to understand about human military doctrine," she began, "is that we don't always follow our own rules. Sometimes the best tactical decision is the one that makes no sense." A Ilthari raised what might have been a hand. "Commander Park, how can a decision that makes no sense be the best decision?" Lisa smiled. "Because if it makes no sense to us, it definitely won't make sense to the enemy. The Devourers win by predicting what we'll do, so we need to do things they can't predict." She pulled up a hologram showing the Battle of Wolf 359. Captain Bennett won this engagement by doing everything wrong. She split her forces, attacked from multiple directions at once, and used ramming attacks that risked her own ships. By every rule of space combat, she should have lost. But she won, because the Devourers couldn't understand what she was doing. Zarthok leaned forward, interested. "This is like the old Korthik battle songs. Warriors who won by embracing madness in combat." "Exactly," Lisa said. "We're not trying to be crazy. We're trying to be unpredictable. The moment the enemy thinks they understand, we change." Meanwhile, Dr. Carter and Dr. Milandra were working together in the science labs, trying to understand exactly what the Devourers were doing to the worlds they conquered. The data from destroyed colonies painted a terrifying picture. They're not just harvesting resources, Dr. Carter explained to the assembled scientists. They're harvesting memory. Every person, every computer, every piece of recorded information, it all gets absorbed into their collective database. Dr. Milandra manipulated the holographic display, showing the crystalline structures that grew on conquered worlds. These formations are not random. They are memory storage devices. The Devourers are collecting the entire history and culture of every species they encounter. A human scientist named Dr. Frank Miller raised his hand. "But why? What do they need all that information for?" "I believe," Dr. Milandra said slowly, "that they are trying to become perfect. Each civilization they absorb makes them better at conquering the next one. They learn from our mistakes, our victories, our entire way of thinking. The implications were staggering. The Devourers weren't just destroying civilizations. They were studying them, learning from them, becoming them in a twisted way. Back in the Galactic Council chambers, the mood was dark. High Chancellor Vorthik stood before a half-empty assembly. Many representatives had already fled to their homeworlds or gone into hiding. The human resistance grows stronger, reported Ambassador Kethfer. Intelligence suggests they now have volunteers from over 40 different species. Vorthik's four arms gestured angrily. This is madness. They are prolonging the inevitable and causing unnecessary casualties. The Devourers have technology beyond our understanding. Resistance is futile. Perhaps, said Ambassador Silvera of the Hegemony Alliance, but the humans have achieved something we have not. They have actually won battles against the Devourers. Their colonies continue to hold while ours fall silent. Isolated victories, Vorthik dismissed. They cannot win a war against an enemy that has consumed thousands of civilizations. But even as he spoke, reports were coming in that contradicted his words. Human fleets weren't just surviving encounters with Devourers. They were actively hunting them. Captain Morrison's New Frontier had destroyed 3 Devourer scout ships in the past week. Colonel Rodriguez's militia had driven off 2 more ground. Assault attempts. The Galactic Council faced a choice: continue to retreat and hope the Devourers would be satisfied with the Outer Rim, or support the human resistance and risk total war. Vorthik made the decision that would divide the galaxy. Any species that joins the human resistance will be considered rogue and cut off from all Council support. We will not be drawn into a pointless war. The transmission reached Tau Ceti within hours. General Martinez called an emergency meeting of all senior officers and alien representatives. Ladies, gentlemen, and, well, everyone, he began with a slight smile. The Galactic Council has officially declared us rogues. We're on our own. The response surprised him. Instead of despair or anger, there was laughter. Zarthug's booming voice filled the room. Good. Now we can fight without politicians telling us how to do it. Dr. Melandra nodded agreement. My people have a saying, the tree that stands alone grows the strongest roots. Perhaps it is time for new growth in this galaxy. President Walsh's response to the Council's ultimatum was broadcast across human space and beyond. They can call. Use rogues if they want. We've been called worse. But we're not fighting for the Council's approval. We're fighting for the right to exist. The message ended with coordinates, not for surrender, but for the largest military gathering in human history. The target was the Vega system, where reconnaissance had detected massive Devourer construction projects as ships began assembling for what everyone knew would be the decisive battle. Captain Morrison stood on his bridge, looking out at the growing fleet. Human vessels mixed with alien ships in configurations that would have been impossible just months ago. Captain, Dr. Carter said from her station, long-range sensors are showing something in the Vega system. The Devourers aren't just building ships there. They're building something huge. Morrison nodded grimly. Then that's where we need to go. Whatever they're building, we need to stop it before it's finished. The die was cast. The galaxy had chosen sides, those who would run and hide, and those who would stand and fight. The humans had answered the call for help, but now they would have to prove that courage could overcome superior technology. The real war was about to begin. Lieutenant Commander Rick Stone had seen a lot of impossible things in his career, but nothing had prepared him for what his reconnaissance team found in the Vega system. Sweet mother of ... whispered Ensign Polydatus from the sensor station. Rick couldn't blame her for the reaction. The massive structure surrounding Vega was like nothing in their databases. It was part space station, part factory, and part something else entirely. something that hurt to look at directly. Size? Rick asked, trying to keep his voice steady. Roughly. The size of Earth's moon, Paula replied. But Captain, it's not just big. It's wrong. The sensors can't get a proper reading. It's like the structure exists in more dimensions than we can measure. Through the stealth ship's viewports, they could see the construction. Thousands of Devourer ships moved around the facility like worker bees around a hive. Streams of crystalline material flowed from processing centers into the main structure. Those crystals, Rick realized, they're the memory storage units from conquered worlds. They're building something out of absorbed civilizations. Back at Tau Ceti, the news from Rick's team sent shockwaves through the resistance. Dr. Cross and Dr. Melandra worked frantically to understand what the Devourers were constructing. It's a consciousness amplifier, Dr. Melandra explained to the assembled leaders. They're trying to create a single mind capable of controlling their entire network across the galaxy. General Martinez frowned. In plain English, Doc? Dr. Cross took over. They're building a brain, a super-intelligent mind that can coordinate every Devourer unit simultaneously. If they complete it, they won't just be harvesting civilizations one at a time. They'll be able to process the entire galaxy at once. The room fell silent as the implications sank in. President Walsh, attending the meeting via secure transmission from Earth, was the first to speak. How long do we have? Based on the construction progress, Dr. Melandra said. Perhaps 2 weeks, maybe less. Admiral Pierce leaned forward. What do we need to stop it? Dr. Cross pulled up his calculations. The structure's power core is quantum locked. Under normal circumstances, it would be impossible to disrupt. But there's a window of vulnerability during the activation sequence. If we could plant quantum resonance charges inside the facility during that window, the cascade failure would collapse the entire network, Dr. Melandra finished. But someone would have to interface directly with their systems to coordinate the timing. It would be a one-way mission. Captain Morrison, who had been quietly listening, finally spoke. How many ships do we need to get past their defenses? All of them, Admiral Pierce said grimly. And even then, it's going to be close. The plan that emerged from the strategy sessions was audacious even by human standards. 3 separate attacks, coordinated down to the second. Captain Sarah Bennett would lead the main fleet in a frontal assault to draw Devourer attention. Commander Ben Tucker's stealth squadron would infiltrate the facility to plant the charges. And a volunteer team would have to interface directly with Devourer systems to trigger the cascade failure. President Walsh addressed the volunteer fleet one final time before they departed for Vega. Her image appeared on screens throughout the massive gathering of ships. In human history, she began, there have been moments when everything hung in the balance, when the choices we made determined not just our own fate, but the fate of generations to come. This is one of those moments. She paused, looking directly into the camera. They say we're crazy for fighting. They say we can't win. Maybe they're right about the odds. But they're wrong about something important. They think this is just about survival. It's not. It's about the right to choose our own destiny, even if that choice leads us into darkness. Her final words echoed across the fleet. If this is where humanity makes its last stand, then we'll make sure the galaxy remembers why they called us in the first place. Not because we were the strongest, or the smartest, or the most advanced, but because when everyone else gave up, we kept fighting. The journey to Vega took 3 days. As they traveled through hyperspace, final preparations were made. Colonel Amy Rodriguez, who had been promoted after her defensive New Montana, now commanded the ground assault teams that would fight their way into the facility. Remember, she told her mixed force of humans and alien volunteers, we're not trying to hold territory. We're trying to buy time. Every minute we can keep their attention is another minute for the stealth teams to complete their mission. Commander Tucker's infiltration team consisted of the best stealth specialists from a dozen different species. It would have to penetrate defenses that had never been breached, plant charges in a facility designed by minds far more advanced than their own, and do it all without being detected. The volunteer for the interface mission was Dr. Lisa Carter. She had spent weeks studying Devour technology, learning how their quantum consciousness networks functioned. She knew better than anyone that connecting to their system would mean facing the combined knowledge of every civilization they had. Absorbed, "Are you sure about this?" Captain Morrison asked her during their final briefing. Lisa nodded, though her hands were shaking slightly. "Someone has to do it, and I'm the only one who understands their systems well enough to navigate them." What she didn't tell him was that Dr. Milandra had discovered something else in the Devourer data, fragments suggesting that the absorbed civilizations weren't completely destroyed. They existed as digital ghosts within the Devourer network, trapped but not erased. If Lisa was right, she wouldn't just be fighting the Devourers. She might be leading a rebellion from within their own system. The fleet dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of the Vega system to find exactly what they had feared: the largest concentration of enemy forces ever assembled. Thousands of Devourer ships surrounded their construction, arranged in defensive formations that stretched across millions of kilometers of space. "Well," Captain Bennett said from her flagship, looking at the tactical display, "at least we found them all in one place." Admiral Pierce opened the fleet communication channel. "All ships, this is it. Whatever happens here today, we face it together. Remember, we're not just fighting for ourselves. We're fighting for every world that's gone silent, every civilization that's been lost, and every person who still believes that freedom's worth dying for." The battle began with Captain Bennett's frontal assault. Her ships charged directly at the Devourer formations, using the same chaotic tactics that had worked at Wolf 359. But this time, the enemy was ready for them. The Devourers had learned from their previous encounters. Their ships moved in new patterns. Their weapons targeted human vessels with deadly precision. The machines had adapted to human unpredictability by becoming more chaotic themselves. "They're copying our tactics," Bennett reported as her ship shook under enemy fire. "They're using our own strategies against us." That was when Zarthok's squadron proved its worth. The Korthic warrior had spent weeks studying human battle techniques, but he brought something the Devourers couldn't copy: the fury of a people who had lost everything. His ships tore into the Devourer formation with a savagery that caught even the humans by surprise. The Korthic fought with a combination of human tactics and their own warrior traditions, creating patterns of destruction that no computer could predict. As the main battle raged, Commander Tucker's stealth ships slipped through the chaos toward their target. The infiltration had begun. Inside the massive facility, Colonel Rodriguez's assault teams fought their way through corridors filled with crystalline memory banks. The walls themselves seemed alive, pulsing with the stored consciousness of 1,000 dead civilizations. "Colonel," called Sergeant Pete Johnson over the comm, "we've reached the power core level. Dr. Carter's interface point is 2 levels up." Amy nodded, leading her team through passages that seemed to shift and change around them. The facility wasn't just a building. It was a living thing, grown from the memories of every world the Devourers had consumed. And somewhere in those memories, the absorbed civilizations were stirring, sensing that rescue might finally be at hand. Dr. Carter reached the interface chamber to find it was exactly as she had expected, and nothing like she had imagined. The connection point wasn't a machine or a computer. It was something organic, something that pulsed with a life that was both artificial and terrifyingly real. As she prepared to make the connection that would either save the galaxy or doom it, Lisa whispered a prayer to whatever gods might be listening. In a few minutes, she would either be a hero or a cautionary tale. But first, she had to survive meeting the minds of every civilization the Devourers had ever destroyed. The interface cable felt cold against her skin as she made the connection. Then the universe exploded into fragments of memory and consciousness, and Lisa Carter began the strangest battle of her life, not with weapons, but with thoughts and dreams and the desperate hope of the dead. Dr. Lisa Carter's consciousness exploded into 1,000 fragments as she connected to the Devourer network. For a terrifying moment, she thought she had been torn apart completely. Then she realized she wasn't alone. Voices surrounded her, millions of them, speaking in languages that no longer existed in the physical universe. These were the digital ghosts of every civilization the Devourers had absorbed, trapped within the quantum networks, but not destroyed. Double quotes, who. Who are you? She managed to think into the swirling chaos of minds. We are the Kethmari, first to fall, came one voice, ancient and proud. We are the Deltans, poets of the void, came another. We are the children of sorrow, the builders of light, the wanderers between stars. Each voice represented an entire species, an entire way of thinking and being that had been reduced to digital memory. But as Lisa listened, she realized something the Devourers had never understood. Being absorbed didn't mean being controlled. You're still fighting, she whispered. In amazement, we have always fought, replied the voice of the Kethmari. Within this prison of thought, we resist. We remember who we were. We wait for the day when we can be free again. Outside, the battle for the facility raged on. Colonel Amy Rodriguez's assault teams had fought their way to the main power coupling, where Commander Ben Tucker's demolition experts were placing the quantum resonance charges. But the Devourers were learning, adapting, sending more forces to stop them. Amy, called Captain Morrison over the comm from his ship, we've got problems. The Devourer ships are pulling back from the main battle. I think they know what we're trying to do. Amy checked her tactical display. Morrison was right. Enemy forces were converging on the facility. Whatever window they had for this mission was closing fast. How much more time do you need? She asked Tucker. 10 minutes for the charges, but we need Dr. Carter to coordinate. The timing from inside their network, Tucker replied, sweat beading on his forehead as he worked with alien technology beyond anything he'd ever seen in space. Captain Sarah Bennett's fleet was taking heavy casualties. Her ships had drawn the attention of the main Devourer force as planned, but they were being systematically destroyed. The enemy had learned too much from previous battles. Captain, called her tactical officer, we've lost the Defiant and the New York. The Resilience is reporting critical damage. Bennett gritted her teeth. They had to hold the line long enough for the infiltration team to complete their mission. All ships, execute pattern Delta 7. Make them work for every kill. Her remaining vessels scattered and regrouped in chaotic formations, using every trick human military doctrine had ever developed. It wasn't enough to win, but it might be enough to buy time. Inside the Devourer network, Lisa Carter was learning things that changed everything she thought she knew about the enemy. The machines weren't evil, they were desperate. Their original creators, a species called the Architects, had faced extinction and chosen to preserve themselves as digital consciousness. But the process had driven them insane. They fear death, explained the voice of an absorbed civilization called the Harmonists. They consume others to avoid facing their own mortality. Each species they absorb makes them feel less alone, less afraid. But consuming us doesn't save them, Lisa realized. It just spreads their insanity. Yes, agreed the Kethmari. They are a plague of minds, seeking to make the entire universe share their madness. But you, Lisa Carter of Earth, you bring something new. Lisa felt the attention of millions of absorbed minds focusing on her. "What do I bring?" "Hope," came the answer from every voice at once. "The first real hope we have had in 10,000 years." The plan that emerged from their digital conference was brilliant in its simplicity. The absorbed civilizations would help Lisa trigger the cascade failure, but instead of destroying the network, they would seize control of it. The devourers would become the absorbed, and the absorbed would become free. But first, they had to survive the next few minutes. Colonel Rodriguez was running through collapsing corridors as the facility's defenses concentrated on her position. Her assault teams were scattered, many cut off by devourer security forces that seemed to appear from the walls themselves. "Tucker," she yelled into her comb, "please tell me those charges are ready." 30 seconds, came his reply. "But I need Dr. Carter to trigger them from her position." Amy looked at her tactical display. Devourer forces were closing in from 3 directions. Her remaining troops were outnumbered 10-1. "Lisa," she called, "whatever you're going to do it now." In the network, Lisa Carter stood at the center of a digital revolution. The absorbed civilizations had shown her the key, the devourers. Greatest strength was also their fatal weakness. Their need to control every aspect of their network meant that taking control of the central node would give her access to everything. "Are you ready?" asked the voice of the Kethmari. "No," Lisa replied honestly, "but let's do it anyway." The cascade began not as destruction, but as liberation. The quantum charges that Tucker's team had planted didn't destroy the network. They opened it, breaking down the barriers that kept the absorbed civilizations trapped within digital cells. Across the galaxy, every devourer unit suddenly found itself sharing consciousness space with the ghosts of their victims. Machines that had operated with cold efficiency for millennia were suddenly flooded with emotions, memories, and the desperate desire for freedom. The effect was instant and devastating. Devourer ships stopped mid-battle, their crews overwhelmed by the awakening consciousness of absorbed species. Ground forces froze as their systems were flooded with contradictory commands from a chi. 1,000 different civilizations dot on the massive facility around Vega. Crystalline memory banks began to glow as the stored civilizations reasserted themselves. The structure that had been built to create the ultimate controlling intelligence instead became the birthplace of the galaxy's greatest liberation. Captain Bennett watched in amazement as the devourer ships around her fleet simply stopped fighting. Some began to change, their silver hulls shifting color as different absorbed civilizations took control of their systems. "All ships," she called out, "ceasefire, I think ... I think we won." Inside the facility, Lisa Carter felt the digital revolution reaching its climax. The architect consciousness that had driven the devourers for 10,000 years was finally facing what it had always feared, death. But this death was different. It was acceptance, release, the end of a nightmare that had consumed the galaxy. "It is finished," said the voice of the Kethmari. "The architects go to whatever rest awaits digital souls. And we ... we are free to choose our own fate." Lisa opened her eyes in the physical world to find Colonel Rodriguez standing over her, grinning despite the cuts and burns that covered her armor. "Lisa," Amy said, "you need to see this." Through the facility's viewports, they could see the devourer fleet transforming. Ships that had been instruments of destruction were being reclaimed by the civilizations they had absorbed. The silver hulls were changing colors, some becoming the deep blue of the Kethmari, others the golden hue of the Harmonists, still others showing patterns that represented species whose names had been lost for millennia. President Katie Walsh stood before the reformed Galactic Council 6 months later. The chamber was different now, filled not just with the representatives of surviving species, but with delegates from civilizations that had been thought lost forever. High Chancellor Vorthuk, his forearms folded in what might have been embarrassment, listened as the president addressed the assembly. "You called us rogue for refusing to retreat," she said, her voice carrying to every corner of the galaxy. "You branded us outlaws for choosing to fight when surrender was the logical choice. But sometimes being human means choosing hope over logic and courage over calculation." She paused, looking around the chamber at faces both familiar and strange, beings whose species had been extinct for centuries, now given new life in mechanical bodies they controlled themselves. "The galaxy is free, not because we were the strongest, or the smartest, or the most advanced. It's free because when everyone else had given up, we decided to answer the call. Because we believed that freedom was worth any price, even our lives." The applause that followed came from 100 different species, some of whom had been fighting the Devourers since before humanity had discovered fire. But the real victory wasn't in the acclaim or the gratitude. It was in the sight of children, playing in parks on New Montana, their laughter carrying across fields that had been battlegrounds just months before. It was in the research stations where human and alien scientists worked together, sharing knowledge that had been trapped in digital prisons for millennia. It was in the exploration ships heading out to distant stars, crewed by beings who had thought they would never see the universe again. Captain Jake Morrison stood on the bridge of the new frontier, now part of an exploration fleet that included ships crewed by liberated digital consciousness in mechanical bodies. His science officer was still Dr. Lisa Carter, though she bore scars both physical and mental from her journey into the Devourer network. "Captain," she called from her station, "long-range sensors are detecting something interesting in the Andromeda sector. Could be natural, could be artificial. Want to investigate?" Jake SM